you're all in the advanced group. Have you all done BP debates before?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and have you all had the practice of doing closing calves before?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just start with the most basic question. What do you think you need to do to win a debate in the closing calf?
Better than this.
Yeah.
You need to bring new arguments. If you can't, you should bring better extensions than the opening. And the web should show that the government did a good job, but you did a much better job.
Okay, yeah.
I think a very important job to do as the closing half is generally finding aspects of the debate that were not discussed in the front half and try to address them in the back half so you can fill the gaps.
Alright, let's step back for a moment. What are all teams in a debate trying to do? If you could encapsulate what your role is in any position, obviously you have to define, etc., different positions, but just broadly, what does any team need to prove?
Convince the judge.
Convince the judge of what?
If their side of the house is like the best side that is bringing out the motion.
Convince the judge that their impacts are much more important than the other teams.
Put this together. I mean, I think just one way I like framing what every team is trying to do in a debate is you want to show, on balance, your side of the debate is best. And just explain each part of that is on balance is in almost any debate with any teams who are even reasonably comparable, there will be arguments on both sides of the debate which are correct. That by the end of the debate, we believe some proposition arguments, we believe some opposition arguments, we believe there's some first proposition arguments, some first opposition arguments. That's going to happen because if you have a balanced debate, it's a debate for a reason, and the reason is that there are arguments on both sides which can be well made. So your aim isn't just to come up with new arguments, it's to say, the arguments I am giving you, and which you believe to be true, because of what I've said, because of what other teams have said, are the arguments which win us this debate. And it's always just worth keeping that in mind. You are going to lose arguments in debates. Another team will beat you for an argument. There are things you will not be able to respond to, or not be able to respond to well. The question is just going to be, why is what you win and what you say much more important than what you lose by the end of the debate? And just bear that in mind for every single team in a debate. So let's talk about then the closing half and how to weaponize that concept to make you more powerful. What do people find to be the challenges when they are extending in the closing half?
Do not repeat what the opening said.
Okay, so you need to do something new, which is, we say what is an extension, let's ignore that. The question is, what value are you adding to the debate? When you have a good opening half team, they will often take the most obvious arguments. So you're in an immediate position where you cannot simply repeat those arguments. That's one challenge. What are the other challenges? Yeah.
Maybe not repeat refutation to the extension of the argument of the opposite argument, so you don't get lost and put effort and much further off the topics.
Yeah. So we'll come back to that because I think that could be quite interesting in terms of what you could do with it. But other challenges people face, yeah.
I guess having the arguments that are more impactful than the arguments that were said in the opening.
Right. So even in the world where you are adding new arguments, that does not mean you are winning. And this is obvious, but let's just state this explicitly. Having new material does not mean you have winning new material. The question is at the end, is this material on balance more powerful than the material which is coming out of the teams? So that's the second challenge, which is, can you say things which are new, and can you say things which are more powerful than what the other team has said? And implicitly, that second should be even more of a challenge. You have a good first half team, not only are they covering the arguments, they're probably covering the most important arguments, what they believe to be the most important arguments. These both seem to be challenges. Another difficulty I think teams often run into is, if you as a spectator watch a debate, you'll hear you'll listen quite intently to what teams are saying, and you'll probably have quite a few responses. When you're actually in a debate, you are thinking about your own speech, you're writing notes, you're writing your own speech. The consequence of all of that is you're going to be missing a large chunk of what other teams are saying in a debate. And this is why I think often teams struggle much more with rebuttal than they do with constructive. It's because you're just not listening enough, and then even when you hear something, you're back thinking about something else immediately. For every team in a debate, that's harmful. But for a team in the bottom half, that could be much more harmful. This is because your value in the debate really depends on how you can position yourself to say, this is what I'm doing, this is where I fit into the debate. But if you miss an argument they made, and if the argument, the concession the other team has made makes what you're doing irrelevant, you're in a very difficult position. At least in the top half, you're going to be the first team to make these arguments, so you're much less likely to run into these problems. And I find often one of the biggest challenges teams face is that third one, which is we weren't listening enough, and we have missed important things. Therefore, what we are bringing to this debate isn't that important. So those are just some of those challenges when it comes to extending. So let's back away for one moment and ask how exactly, what are the kinds of things you can do in extension? Let's just list them. It's just all the basics and then we'll take it from there. So what are the kinds of additions you can have in the extension?
New argument.
Okay, a new argument. Let's explain this a bit more. What do you mean by an argument here? This might sound trivial, but just go ahead. What do you mean by an argument?
Reason, analysis.
A way of thinking or a way of debating or a way of defending my point of view.
Those two things can be very different. So let's split them up into two, which is what motion did you do in the what motion were you discussing in the last session you did? Just so I don't repeat any.
This house would use force to protect human rights.
Okay. Let's go for something actually really basic, because I think this probably highlights this more. So let's legalize all recreational drugs, so cocaine, heroin, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so what is a new way of thinking in that debate? Obviously, it depends what the first ways of thinking are, but what are ways of thinking in that
The
debate?
economy will be better because people are more likely to buy them from legal sources than from the back alley sources. So it could be a legitimate trade.
So step back for a moment. So the economy can be better. What you are saying there is, here is a different actor, in this case the rest of society, who may be benefited as a result. Now, that's an argument, right? And that can be a potentially powerful argument. But when it comes to a way of looking at the debate, what you are actually telling me is that we should not care solely about the individual. There are other actors of importance, and you're specifying what they are. Now, it's similar. So if I, for instance, one of the basic arguments I want to make is that it is not reasonable for a government to limit what I am able to do with my own body. I should be able to decide what I consume. I have the right to do so. And that's an argument. That's a way of thinking. That there's a principle in this debate. And there's lots of arguments you can use to prove that, right? There'll be an argument where you go that the government knows considerably less than me, I have a better idea of my own body, it's that it's perfectly reasonable to consent and to harm, all activities we engage with are potentially harmful, but the joy can overcome anything else. It could be that, it could be things like that, but that's an argument, right? So those are a reason to believe that that way of thinking is correct and falls on your side. Does that make sense? It's just a distinction I want to draw. So one reason I think it's useful to draw that distinction is to try and be very clear about what you can do in a third speech. So let's go for, you can have a new way of thinking in Thailand, which is an entirely new way a government should, the judge or audience should look at this debate. There are also just new arguments, which is, here is a way which already exists. This is how we are adding to it. What else can you do?
Is it a new strategy, a new argument, a new rebuttal? That's the extension that I can have. So a new strategy, it's a new way of thinking. New
Yeah.
argument, so it's what I'm adding to this way of thinking.
Yeah.
And a new rebuttal, it's something that they haven't mentioned, an argument of the opposition team that they didn't rebuttal before, so I'm going to rebuttal it. That's it.
Broadly, that's correct, yeah.
Like more analysis on the same thing, but more analysis, more explanation, more examples on the same thing.
Let's come back to that one in one moment, but anyone else? Yeah.
I could maybe run an impact case on the back half, like talk about like do more. It's called an extension speech. I should just do an extension, like see how certain things, how this policy can affect on, like can act on the bigger picture, for example, or yeah.
Yes, I mean, so I think that fits within this new way of thinking, new strategy way of looking at debate. So let's take each one of these in turn and look at how you do it and how you make it to be the most effective. So first, let's go for the new argument. Now, again, what do you need to do to make something stand in a debate, to prove something in a debate? What are the parts of it you need to prove?
That it's relevant.
Okay, what do you mean by relevant?
That this debate is about this subject, not about something else.
And roll
Okay, fair enough, yeah, so you do need to prove it's relevant. Let's assume in most debates that the arguments people make is relevant. What else do you need to prove to make an argument stick in a debate?
Like compare it to what other teams have already said before, like to make it relevant to what they have
Like
said.
why it's most likely to happen.
So,
Why is it true? Why is it important?
okay, so let's go, so here are the 3 ones, right? So first, why is something true? And this fits in both what you have said and what someone else has said. And that is a very important part of making an argument, but it's not the sole part. The second is, why is it good or bad? And I think that kind of fits into why it's relevant. But just bear this in mind. It's sometimes going to be important, sometimes not, which is, in some debates, it is the case that the other side might just go, I agree, but that's good, or I agree, but that's bad. So a classic example, an example I always remember, is a debate about allowing foreigners to join the US military. You know, one side, the opposition was like, and as a result, the US military will be much weaker and much less effective. The other side said, I agree, but that's good. And that's just to highlight that even though you've proven something, it isn't always going to be the case that both sides are going to agree that this is a good impact in this debate or a bad impact in this debate. That in and of itself can be contended. And the final one is, why is it important? What does this mean? It sounds again trivial, but let's spell it out.
Like the impact of it.
Yes, so what do you mean by an impact here?
How does it affect like the actors of the emotion? Or
Yeah.
how does it affect people more long term, short term?
Right, so again, if you think about debates on balance, the ideal argument is something which is trivially true and something which you can say, even if I lose every other argument in the debate. Obviously, you wouldn't quite phrase it this way, but even if I lose every other argument in this debate, this argument alone is what wins me the debate. And as a judge, what you're effectively looking for is, have they proven it's true, have they proven it's good or bad, and have they given me a reason that when I weigh this up against all the other arguments in this debate, that this is important. Not necessarily that it's the only thing which is important, but that's the ideal one. So when looking at another team and particular top half, what you're effectively doing is asking, have they shown all of these 3 things? Have they shown that this is true? Now that's the biggest asterisk, because that's the hardest to know if they have shown or not. But second, have they shown that it's good or bad? More often than not, that's going to be trivial. But finally, have they shown it to be important? If they haven't, these are all going to be areas which you can extend on when it comes to making their argument better. If they have shown that something is true, and you just have another reason why it's true, or they have shown it's really important, and you just have another reason why it's important, it's not that you're not adding to this debate, but it's really unlikely that I'm going to find that to be a winning extension, because it's building on something which has already been sufficiently proven that I don't think it needs a great deal more explanation. So that's effectively what you're asking yourself when it comes to anyone else's argument. If you thought about it in prep or think you can make it, ask yourself, have they shown it as true sufficiently enough that any addition I have on this is not going to be particularly important? Have they shown that it's important enough that any addition I have on this is not going to be particularly additive? If the answer is yes, then add to it. If the answer is no, then don't. Which is clearly very straightforward in theory. It may be considerably more complicated in practice. Except one thing. If you believe that teams are bad at response, when you ask yourself if something is true, it's not just whether in a vacuum a team has given you reasons to believe something is true or believe something is important. It is practical questions as to whether or not, given the responses we've got, that thing is true and that thing is important. And often this is the hint I would give, or the tip, which is a team will prove something, but they will not thought enough about the responses they have got. Thus, at the point where you are extending in this debate, the argument is kind of true, except for the things the other side has said. And often your greatest addition when it comes to adding analysis to an argument is saying, look, opening told you this, we stand behind that. But the opposition gave you these responses. If those responses are true, it means that this argument is not true. Given that, we are going to respond to it. And then you can even position yourself more clearly in the debate about what you are doing and why you are making something which the judge should not have believed to be true before true, and why that matters in the debate, because something which is important in the debate is now proven when it wasn't proven before, given the responses you get. And I think this is just the useful part of an extension speech, is to think more about that meta-debating side. As a judge, what are they thinking about this argument at that stage where you are in this debate? What are they thinking the other side has done? What are they thinking hasn't been proven, and you are now going to be trying to prove all of those links? This makes sense as a theoretical way of thinking about how you add to arguments which have already been made. Are there any questions about that just in theory before we build on it and we then talk about other ways of doing this? Great. Okay, what was the second way people had to extend?
New rebuttals.
New rebuttal, great. How do you use new rebuttal?
Either respond to something that has not been responded to before, that the opposition side has already made.
Why does new rebuttal win you a debate? Or when does new rebuttal win you a debate? Or at least be the top half?
When it's rebuttal a strategy and the opposition.
Absolutely. So again, I just want to step back away from people thinking about arguments in isolation, rebuttal in isolation. There will be things you can rebut. If you're closing government, trivially, opening government is not rebutted everything. If you're closing opposition, again, the extension from the government just hasn't been responded to. But responding to those are things you need to do, and they do impact the quality of your speeches, but by themselves, it's unclear whether they win this debate. Because effectively you have to ask yourself, why do I need to rebut this argument? Or what does this argument do to the power of the proposition or the opposition? And therefore, why is it so bad that the other teams haven't responded to it. So it's not just thinking about rebuttal as rebuttal because you're meant to do rebuttal, it's that the other side has made a move. The move they have made is this piece of rebuttal. This piece of rebuttal knocks down this argument because it deals with this. If that is the case, the judge cannot believe this and therefore you lose the debate, or your side is much less powerful. What I am going to do is rebut that argument, and therefore what is said on the top half now still applies. The reason why you do, now, you don't necessarily use quite those words, but that's the idea you want to communicate. You want to communicate that idea both to make it clear to a judge what you are doing, but also lots of judges aren't really paying that much attention and don't really know what is going on. And it's an easy excuse to say they cover a lot of material, what have you done? Well, tell them, this is what I'm doing, and this is why this matters in a debate. And that should be reasonably straightforward the second you get into the habit of doing that, which is this is why you're rebutting arguments, and these are the arguments you need to rebut, and this is what ends up being vital to the debate. So again, it's not just new rebuttal, it is obviously part of its new rebuttal, it's giving it context as to why that matters. Let's go for, what was the last one? So, new, improving the arguments made from the other side, new rebuttal, and the final one?
New materials.
Yeah, so just a new strategy, what we I guess call an entirely new clash, which is everyone else in this debate is talking about the individual. I want to look at the impact on other individuals or society overall, or something along those lines. Just going, they have focused on this, we are focusing on something entirely new. And then build that the same way you would build something else. What's the difficulty in doing that?
Think something new.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that, right? And that if something is particularly important, and a good way of looking at this debate, and the opening half hasn't thought about it, there's a reasonable chance it probably isn't that good, or isn't that important in the first place. Or it's going to be, or could be out there, and just doesn't seem to be that powerful. That's a large part of the challenge, even finding that area. What else could be a challenge?
Making that point to make it seem that important.
Yes, and that's the second part of it, which is a judge will say, they prove 3 things, you have 1 thing, 3 is greater than 1. That's obviously terrible judging, but implicitly, that's often the way people are thinking, which is, why should this one way of looking at this debate beat the other 3 ways of looking at the debate the other team has given? And again, this can be a challenge. The positive side of doing this is you're not reliant on carefully tracking the debate, of carefully knowing what another team hasn't proven. But you are reliant on being able to give me something new and be able to frame it as particularly new and powerful in the debate. And that can be a challenge. But again, if you can come up with it, it can be really powerful in a debate. Those are broadly the 3 ways in which you will be extending. Entirely new area, new analysis/arguments to prove an existing area, or third, new rebuttal but an explanation as to where that fits in the rest of the debate which has come out thus far. Any questions about that in terms of extension theory?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you win just by doing rebuttals, or rebuttals and extensions without no arguments?
So here's the question. What is, if you only had new rebuttal, what would you think you needed to do to win?
I need to disprove everything that the opposition or government said, and then I need to prove that what I did is greater than what the opening did.
Right, so at each and every stage, when it comes to new, if you're going to be extending just on rebuttal, that's fine, but at every step it's why this is actually vital to the debate. That this piece of rebuttal is vital to the debate. Now, in theory, you could win if you just rebutted absolutely everything the other team said. And your rebuttal is not just that what you are saying is untrue, but is what you are saying is actively the opposite of reality. So when we think of responding to an argument, it's first what you're saying is untrue, but in fact, if you care about X, we achieve X better on our side. If you can do that, yes, you could win just with rebuttal. Much more likely, you will have to pick the important bits which need to be rebutted, explain how the other side, how the opening government, for instance, arguments fit into that, and therefore why your rebuttal matters so much. If you do that, effectively what you're doing is saying that opening government's arguments win the debate if and only if you include our rebuttal to them, and therefore we should get more credit than they do, because while their arguments were not powerful or persuasive before we spoke, they are powerful after we spoke. That's effectively what you're doing. So the answer there is yes, but you have to use it carefully enough and explain what you are doing to get there. Or at least you have to know in your own head what you are doing to get there. Because if you don't, you're probably not going to be communicating those kinds of ideas well to a government. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, let's try and, yeah.
After the second speaker, like the debate starts speaking, and the debate is at the end of their speech. Say, let's say a little like whip speech, like we believe us as opening, let's say, opposition have had a better argumentation and have had better like reasoning and evidence than the opening government, and we think that we should be credited for that, and we think that the judges should take this into consideration, or is it like not suitable?
You absolutely can. You want to be, one thing I would say is you want to be a little bit subtle about how you deploy meta-debating. In that effectively what you're doing is saying, judge like this. Judges don't really like you saying judge like this, but that is effectively what you're telling them. You don't want to allow a judge to actually do any thinking. You want to present it on their piece of paper as to what you were saying. So yes, but more subtle you can make it, the better. Which is, you know, we stand behind our opening who gave us a great case. What was missing, unfortunately, was this. What they tell you is this, but what is missing is this. Opening rightly note, blah, and blah. So you can do it referential to the debate, but not referential to external from the debate, if that makes sense, which is, you're telling us what happened, but not how someone should see it, even though obviously anyone who reads who listens to what you're saying is going like, obviously that's how I should see it. So it's just about, I don't think most judges will mind doing either, but don't take the risk and don't try and tell them what to do. Just try and tell other people what is happening and therefore what you're doing.
Thank you.
Great. What I think is probably useful is that we do a couple of exercises in terms of how exactly we build this. And this is never entirely straightforward, but what I think could be useful is if we have, there are 3-ish rows. Yeah, so the first thing we think that a government team will probably make is that this is an impact on inequality. We can talk about how in a moment, but probably the first thing that seems to be an obvious starting point. What else will they want to say? Right, so let's step back from that again. So what is this argument doing?
Trying to show how does this solve the main problem of why do we have poverty?
Yeah, so I think there are 2 things which are worth highlighting about that.
The point of
Yeah.
Like to explain to the judge why your idea.
It's great to explain why the claim or the argument is true, or why give evidence.
Yeah, I mean, just more generally than that, I think one way to think about analysis is what you are trying to do is to, one, make sure that in a vacuum a judge believes something is true, so that you don't reject it because it has no substantiating logic behind it. And the second thing, the second purpose of it, is to make sure your argument stands up to challenge. And I think that second part is pretty important because I think a lot of teams spend a lot of time building an argument and having lots of analysis because they think analysis is good. But the question is, did they need all of that? Could that have just been a waste of time? Maybe what they were talking about and spending so much time explaining on isn't controversial in the debate, or the other side's just going to accept it. And I think it's just useful to start from that point, which is you don't need to explain everything you are saying in the same amount of detail, because certain things are going to be accepted by other teams, are so trivial that they don't need an explanation, and if you're going to spend a lot of time explaining it, really you are just wasting your time. And more importantly, really what you need to do is build the arguments which are going to be attacked. Because even if you build an argument beautifully, but you never think about the ways it could be attacked, and make sure that it automatically or inherently deals with those likely attacks to it, you aren't really getting very far in the debate. You want to make sure that everything you're saying stands up to challenge. Obviously, that's not always going to be possible, but ideally, you're not going to be reactive. It's not going to be you make an argument, the other side responds, and you have to respond to their response. Ideally, you have an argument which already will respond to most of the claims the other team will make. And then all you need to do in the second speech is note that, even or potentially very little at all, if they haven't actually responded to it. I just want to start with that idea because it just gets you an idea of what you actually need to do with analysis. So from there, let's just go through the building blocks. If I'm going to analyze an argument, what do I need to prove? What are the stages of analysis?
Look at the burden behind this argument.
Yeah, so step one obviously is why you're making that argument. Now, generally that should be fairly straightforward, but it is sometimes worth saying in terms of why this is relevant to the debate in the first place. Yeah. Let's separate these two things out. So yeah, why is it relevant to the debate? What's the second thing? What's the second thing you do with analysis?
Sample.
Before that.
Breaking it into the actors of the...
Even more basic than that, effectively all you were trying to tell me is, I have made this claim. This claim is relevant to the debate. Maybe you include that. And it's, this claim is true. And a way, and just making sure you're always just having almost a checkbox to do these things. Here are reasons why what I am claiming is true. One way of knowing where your analysis ends, which is to say where you are done and you don't need to say any more, is ask yourself two questions. Could a judge or could another team just ask, why is this true? So you give a statement, an argument, they say, why is that true? Well, then you need another claim. So just ask yourself why at the end of every claim you make for why something is true. And if it seems so trivial or pretty trivial, then you can end. Second thing you want to do with it is you may, though not necessarily, will use examples or some kind of evidence. What is the value of examples or evidence?
To prove how possibly it's going to be applied, like situation.
Simplify the ideas.
It
To prove
legitimizes
how
what you're
related is
talking
it?
about.
Right, so it's a combination of all of this, right? Because you give me a logical set of links, and you explain why something is likely to be true. Well, there are lots of things which could be logical, but aren't necessarily actually happening. And I think evidence is often a good intuition pump. If X has led to Y in the past, there is probably a reason for it. If this is evidence of why your premises are true, that probably strengthens the reasons why something occurs. And that's why you will sometimes use evidence. But if you don't have any, or you can't come up with any, you don't need it in the argument if the logic stands up to itself. It is useful, but it is not a requirement of a strong argument. So now you have given me reasons why something is true. How many reasons do you need to give me why something is true?
Maybe 3.
It
It
depends
on how good is the reason. If it's very good, one reason can be enough.
Right, I mean, so I think it depends on two things, which is, first, it is ideal to have lots of very well substantiated reasons if you think the argument is important in the debate and likely to be challenged. However, if you have weak reasons, you may well need more reasons, just because it's almost numerical impacting. One somewhat logical reason or somewhat strong reason is okay. 3 of them probably overall, in summation, makes that argument to seem to be more true. The thing I'm stressing here is when it comes to analyzing an argument, it's not just here is a reason why it's true. It may be several reasons why it's true. Sometimes we label that as a different argument, but don't think of it that way. Think of it as a way to explain why something is true, and there are several reasons why. Okay, you convinced me something is true. What else do you need to do?
Why it's matter? What's its impact?
Okay, and what these are nice thoughts, but what does it mean to say, what is the impact?
What's it affects? What its effects on the society or the country or the situation?
For what? Why are you telling me the impacts?
To convince you it's important.
Right. So.
Would it really help in the cause that I'm fighting for, or would it like not help and like give me weakness points?
So I think when we say impact, we're just a little bit vague in terms of what we mean. I think this is a issue with the way we think, the words we use for debating. The real question is, I have this thing which is true, and I want you as a judge to care about it. Now, one way of doing so is to give me the actual outcome, the potential impacts in the real world. Great. But the real thing, the real skill is, why should that matter to the debate? Effectively what we were talking about before, which is, where does this fit into this debate? So if what the debate's really about is the social impact, here are the social impacts, and it's often then why should these social impacts be the most important thing in the debate? Don't think of it in a vacuum of, I just need to make my argument seem important. It instead, given the arguments going back and forth in this debate, why is this argument that important? So not just giving me the impact from it, but it's explaining why those impacts are so important within the context of the debate. Does that make sense? It's just what I think you want to do with the impact. And finally, and again, often you will not be doing this, but sometimes you will, you'll just want to explain why those impacts are good or bad. It is plausible someone could challenge whether these are positive or negative, and you just want to keep that in your mind, that sometimes you may have to defend why the other side could agree with you, it's important that this is what happens, and just disagree about the result. So then you will want to be able to say, maybe the result is different, maybe the result is good, or maybe the result is bad, and be able to defend it. In principle then, analysis isn't very difficult. What complicates it a bit is that this is a debate with another side which is going to be attacking those arguments or potentially coming up with arguments of their own. This works in 2 ways. First, they could just reject the importance of your argument outright, say this is true and unimportant in the debate, and that you could potentially build by explaining the importance, but also ask yourself every time you make an argument, how would I respond to this piece of logic? What would I say about it? Or between you as a team, effectively this is asking, what is the best response the other side can make? And when you think of that, try and make your argument robust to it, both in terms of the importance and in terms of the reasons you are giving or the counter reasons the other side is giving. So, even when you construct an argument, long before anyone has even heard it, you are already thinking, what is the other side going to say, and how can I make it stand up to challenges? Any questions about that? Okay, analysis is then over. It's done, very simple. But let's then try some practical examples and see how this actually goes. So you will still roughly, you're roughly the same order you were before. So let's go back to the teams of 3 and 4, and then we're going to do some worked examples in escalating level of difficulty. Everyone knows what their teams are?
Is it the same motion?
No, it's a different motion. Okay, let's start easy. and let's make sure that you think through all these steps. So let's go for the motion. The motion is going to be, that's not the important bit, the important bit's the argument. We're just going to go for legalize all drugs. Or recreational drugs. About as straightforward as you get. Okay. And the argument I want you all as a team to work out how you optimally explain is that it is an individual's right to take whatever drugs they want, and therefore the government should not ban it.
Can you repeat?
It's an individual's right to take whatever drugs they want, and therefore the government shouldn't ban it. It should allow it. I mean, the last bit's a triviality when it comes to this motion, because it should follow. So if you spend about 5 minutes talking between yourselves how you will make the argument, bearing in mind the steps, we will go from there. Okay, so I think if we step back, just think about the way we want to make this. We want to say that this is a choice between the government having a blanket ban or individuals choosing themselves. Why is it preferable and indeed correct that individuals have the right to make a decision? There is both a positive side and a negative side of taking drugs. There will be individuals who are able to make a determination that the enjoyment they get from psychedelic experiences, from getting high, from pain relief, is worth it to them given the cost of potential short-term or long-term physical or mental damage. That isn't a decision a government can make for absolutely everyone. Now, for some people, the enjoyment is worth it. For other people, it may not be. But that is not a reason for the government to have a blanket policy, but instead to hand over responsibility to individuals to make that determination themselves. And why are they best placed to make it? Well, partly they know their own bodies, they know their will, they know their wishes, they know what pain they want and the benefits which they want, and they have to own the consequences of it rather than a government which doesn't. And I think we're all hinting around that, but just to make this as sharp as possible, this is the choice individuals are making. They're in a better position to make that choice, given that there is not a single unique answer which is true for everyone about what is better. And I think if you build it like that and we keep talking around it, you make it much clearer to me what exactly is at stake and why individuals are best placed to make that decision for themselves. Building on that, can we think of some analogies to make this more plausible? Effectively examples of other cases where the government allows this, or other things which are legal, which clearly have harms and benefits. Yeah.
Smoking.
Let's give me more.
Marijuana.
Legalizing marijuana in the US.
Yeah. So let's drop marijuana because presumably that it fits questionably in this side. As it, yeah. Go ahead.
Also like fast food, like it damages the body a lot, but yet it's perfectly legal to buy like fast food and eat it.
Yeah. So let's.
Sugar and alcohol.
So let's just phrase this slightly differently. Let's replace drugs with this house would ban fast food. And you want to say that it's the right of individuals to eat fatty food. Would someone like to make that argument for me?
Can you repeat the question?
So just say the motion is this house would ban fatty food, right? So food with lots of fat. So effectively fast food, but like unhealthy fast food, i.e. most fast food. And you're trying to explain that you shouldn't because it's an individual's right to eat fast food.